June 6, 1944 is a date that will live in history forever. On that day, over 150,000 Allies landed in Normandy Beach with the objective of liberating Europe from Nazi occupation. Codenamed Operation Overlord, D-Day was the beginning of the end of the war. On today, the 74th anniversary of D-Day, we remember the men who fought and died so we could live the lives we live today. So today on World War II history, we look at Operation Overlord.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Ever since the fall of France and the failure of the Battle of Britain in 1940, the Nazis knew that an Allied attack on Northern Europe was inevitable. So between the years of 1942 and 1944, German commander Erwin Rommel ordered for the creation of the Atlantic Seawall. This was roughly 1,700 miles of German defences which covered the coastline from France all the way to Norway. Although the Axis forces had the advantage of their Atlantic seawall, the Allies had the advantage of having the element of surprise on the Nazis. They got to choose a date and location on which this almighty invasion would take place. A few years prior to D-Day, the planning for this invasion began. Churchill and Roosevelt put General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery in charge of this invasion and left them to it. These two men knew that beach invasion was dangerous following Allied experience in Sicily, D.P. and North Africa, so they took extra measures to make sure that every detail was spot on. In the months leading up to D-Day, the Allies practiced and replicated what they were going to do at Gullin Beach in Scotland. Every man knew what he had to do, and he knew his duty. Montgomery and Eisenhower knew that they'd have to divert attention away from the landing zone if they wanted this to work, so they came up with a plan. Operation Fortitude. Operation Fortitude was set underway with the goal of tricking Hitler into believing that the Allies were going to land at Pas de Calais and not Normandy. Phantom field armies were created in Edinburgh and southern England, all in order to divert Axis attention away from the beaches at Normandy. As well as fake radio transmissions were sent, all to try and make the Nazis think the Allies were landing at Pas de Calais, the quickest and shortest route across the English Channel. Inevitably, Operation Fortitude worked. Hitler ordered for Pas de Calais to be heavily reinforced and for thousands upon thousands of soldiers to be waiting there ready for an attack. This left Normandy to be defended heavily by unexperienced reserves under the command of Erwin Rommel. However, Rommel wasn't too sure that landings were going to happen in Pas de Calais, as he had previous experience with Allied amphibious landings. Rommel ordered that the 50-mile Normandy beachhead would be covered in hedgehogs to prevent landing craft and for thousands of mines to be planted, which would make any invasion a living hell. Eventually, a date was decided for the attack. June 5th, 1944. On the eve of June 5th, every soldier was being briefed and prepared to fight. However, news came in that the channel was too stormy to make an invasion, so it got postponed until further notice. Then, the Allies saw their chance. They saw a break in the storm in the early morning of June 6, 1944, and they took their chance. They were going to war. On the eve of June 6, 1944, the 101st and 82nd Airborne were getting geared up and ready for the drop behind enemy lines in the early hours of D-Day, a couple hours before the amphibious invasion. In the early hours of June 6, off they set. Being carried in gliders and aircraft, over 15,000 airborne troops were dropped behind enemy lines with the objectives of capturing key crossroads, capturing bridges, and preventing the Axis from getting any support and reinforcement. Right away though, a problem occurred. No paratrooper landed in their drop zone, as heavy flak came in from down below, forcing the planes to swerve and turn away. This resulted in airborne troops landing too early or too late. Nearly every airborne troop landed in random places across France, making it much harder for them to capture any of their objectives. Nonetheless, small groups of paratroopers joined forces with each other and fought hard and bravely to capture their objectives. They captured key towns such as Carentan, which linked Omaha and Utah beachheads together. And although it was hard fighting, the paratroopers were successful and captured nearly all their objectives. Throughout the morning, the paratroopers kept on fighting, destroying hundreds of mortars and guns firing on the soldiers advancing on the beach, and undoubtedly, without the braveness and the courageous fighting the 82nd and 101st Airborne showed, Operation Overlord could have been an almighty fail. And on a side note, if you want to know more about the 101st Airborne, I'd highly recommend watching the 10-part series, Panda Brothers. A few hours after the airborne assault had begun on Normandy, the infantry divisions moved into position. Over 125,000 men were transported on landing craft to the 5 sectors of the Normandy beach. These were Omaha, Utah, Juneau, Gold, and Sword. Omaha and Utah were invaded by the Americans, whereas Juneau, Gold, and Sword were invaded by the British and Canadians. Ultimately, the worst beach to be on that day was Omaha Beach, as it was the bloodiest and most brutal, with sometimes full waves of men being killed. Nonetheless, these men fought bravely and made it to the seawall, where they could regroup and prepare for themselves for the attack on the bunkers, which were raining hell on the men down below. A little down from Omaha, in the middle of Omaha and Utah, men from the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalion had the unthinkable task of scaling the 100-foot cliffs at Point du Hoc, all whilst under heavy fire from the Nazis. They had the objective of dismantling 6 guns which were supposedly raining fire down the men of Omaha and Utah Beach. However, when the men finally scaled the cliff, they found that all of the guns had been moved to a different location. That didn't stop them. They sent small groups of men out to look for the guns, and they managed to successfully destroy them. They used thermite grenades to successfully dismantle them and put them out of order. This saved thousands of lives on the beaches, and without those actions, who knows what could have happened. Back on the 5 beachheads, the men were beginning to break through the lines. The British and Canadian sectors were relatively easy to capture, but further down at Omaha and Utah it was proving to be much more difficult. Nonetheless, the brave men fought through, forcing the Germans defending the beach to surrender. At the end of June 6, 1944, every sector was in the hands of the Allies. For the next coming days, the Allies heavily reinforced the beaches, bringing armoured vehicles, men, and ammunition. As well as this, the fighting went on. The Allies captured many important towns like Carentan and St. Mary de Mont. Despite facing heavy German counterattacks, they held on and kept fighting. Arguably, the success of Operation Overlord was the beginning to the end of the war on the Northern Front. From then on, all the Germans did was kept falling back, and all the way into Germany. Today, on the 74th anniversary, we remember those men who fought and died bravely and courageously to free Northern Europe from Nazi occupation, and for that we owe them our lives and our gratitude. If they hadn't done what they did, who knows what type of world we could be living in right now. May all the men who fell on D-Day in the following months rest in peace. To every man who fought and died so we could live our lives today, thank you.